Hope you brought your thinking brains tonight. You're going to need those from here on. you're going to need those when we're doing apologetics. So, worked a long day and didn't use your brain, right? Now you can kick it in gear. All right. So tonight we are going to talk about objectivism, or sometimes called absolute truth. The basic question is what is truth and how do we know it? How do you recognize truth when you see it? What is our standard of truth? And so this, I think, and we're starting off with this intentionally because I think that this is probably the underlying issue that runs through all of the other issues, okay? All of the other apologetic questions at some point are going to touch on this. Because how you know what's true is that's kind of fundamental, right? So real quick though, before we dive in, so last week we talked about apologetics, which means what in one word? Defense, right? Defense of the faith. And so we talked about 4 reasons to study apologetics. So I'm recapping this because this is going to come up again tonight, and this is going to come up repeatedly. So the first reason, to advance the gospel. So you saw that in Acts 17 when Paul is speaking to the Athenians, right? And then the second reason, to promote tolerance. You saw an example of that in Athenagoras as he's arguing to the emperor to promote tolerance. The third reason is to preserve sound doctrine. You got an example of that in Irenaeus as he's arguing against heresies, right? I love Irenaeus, by the way. He's like one of my favorite early church writers because he's witty and sharp and not afraid to poke fun at heretics. So, and then the last one, to promote the steadfastness of believers by demonstrating rationality of the faith. We're going to talk about that. We'll give some examples of that tonight. You'll see that one in action. So, we talked about 2 sources of knowledge, right? Before I put it up there. Mm-hmm. What were they? General revelation, special revelation, right? So general revelation is what? Creation. Logic, any source of knowledge that you don't have to be a believer to be able to see, right? So logic, math, science, creation. I mean, you can sum all that up and just say creation, right? And the other one is particular or special revelation, which means what? Scripture, right? What God has revealed to us in His Word, right? And that would probably also include through Jesus Christ Himself, right? God has revealed us Himself through the Word, Jesus Christ. Okay, so tonight we're going to look at this question of how do we know truth. So first off, we're going to talk about how people outside of Christianity, how they approach truth. So that we're going to focus primarily tonight on moral truth. Right? We're not going to be talking about scientific truth or mathematical truth. All truth is God's truth, yes, but we're going to specifically focus on moral truth and religious truth because that's kind of what we're doing apologetics for, right? So one of the biggest approaches that we see in our world today for determining moral truth is what we call moral relativism. This is huge. And basically the approach is there is no such thing as moral truth. Basically just denies that it exists. Okay? Moral relativism is the view that moral judgments are true or false only relative to some particular standpoint. For instance, that of a culture or historical period, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. And so, why is it wrong to murder? Because our society says so, right? And they might make an appeal to, because it's bad for the society if everybody's killing each other, right? But it's not necessarily that murder itself is evil. If you follow moral relativism, terms like good and evil are really kind of meaningless because it all depends on your perspective, your point of view. This viewpoint started I mean, it goes all the way back to the 5th century. We'll even see examples of it in Scripture from even further back. But it really kicked off in the 1600s and got really popular in the 1800s and 1900s. By the 1900s, this was the prevailing norm. This is how people thought. And so you think about the 1800s and 1900s. Why do you think that such a view might have taken off during that time? What was going on in the world? Think about the 1800s. What is it known for?
Horse and buggies.
Yeah.
Okay. The Industrial Revolution, right? So that was all going on at that time.
Lots of farming and stuff.
Yeah. What else was going on? What came along with Industrial Revolution that might have led to contact with other cultures?
Big corporations, big business.
Yeah.
International trade.
International trade, travel was starting. International travel starting to really take off.
Being built back then too.
Right. Yeah. And so this put people in more and more contact with other cultures, people that did not think like them. Used to, you could go your entire life and you never meet somebody who really thought differently than you, right? But now, in the 1800s and especially by the 1900s, travel, international travel is opening up all these new cultures, right? Also, the decline of colonialism, the collapse of colonialism, right? And so when you think about the collapse of colonialism in the late 1800s and through the mid-1900s, especially in the mid-1900s, there's this pushback against any outside authority coming in and imposing their will or their system of beliefs on another culture, right? And so moral relativism, that's what it's all about. Don't impose your views on me. That's good for you, but not for me, right? And so we see lots of examples in our culture, right? I'll just a few of them. From Revenge of the Sith, Anakin Skywalker says, "From my point of view, the Jedi are evil." Right? And this is, I think, right before he goes and slaughters a bunch of kids or something, right? So, I can't remember the exact timeline here, right? But Anakin says, from my point of view, the Jedi, who are supposed to be the good guys, are evil. And so he's emphasizing this personal autonomy, this idea that, well, from my point of view, I have a different definition of evil than you do, right? There's a new spin-off of Star Wars called The Acolyte. I have not seen this, but it apparently has kind of blurred the lines between the good guys and the bad guys. So there's a quote from one of the actors, Charlie Barnett, who said, "The best part about Star Wars is there's no good or evil, depends on what side you're standing on." Right? Well, that's not how Star Wars started off. There was very clear good and bad, light and dark. But now there's this shift in the culture. These newer Star Wars movies are coming out, are making everything more gray, right? It all depends on your perspective. But we don't have to go that modern. Let's think about this one. I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, and much more than this, I did it my way. Right? Frank Sinatra. At the end of he's picturing at the end of his life, his justification for his life is going to be, I did it my way. I did what was right for me based on my perspective, right? So, I mean, this goes back all the way, to the 50s, was Sinatra, right? And it goes back even further than that. But you don't have to go to modern Disney to find examples of this. And what's particularly insidious about this worldview is how slippery and deceptive it is. I mean, how many of us have sang that song, belted it out, and thought it was the best song ever, right? And it's an awesome song. He's standing up for what he thinks is right. But really, this is embracing this moral relativism kind of ideology. There's not a right. I didn't do it the right way. I did it my way, right? And so this, you don't have to go to modern Disney to get this. And so anytime you'll see this in movies and pop culture. Anytime you see traditionally evil characters, bad guys being recast as good guys, or at least recast in a sympathetic light where, oh, I see how they ended up the way they ended up, and I kind of can feel for them, right? There's this big push to recast bad guys as good guys and to recast good guys as not so good guys, right? To kind of level out the field, make everything gray. You'll see little or no appeal to any objective standards of good and evil, more situationally based, right? You could probably name a dozen movies that come to mind. Any that come to mind?
Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but
It's the new Karate Kid.
Yeah,
Remember
yeah.
that?
Okay.
There's a show called
Oh,
Lucifer,
yeah,
I think,
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of glamorizes
Yep,
him.
that's right. I haven't seen it,
Yeah,
but
I've seen some of that.
that's
He's
right.
like a detective.
It gives me the creeps every time I see the ad for it.
It's a show called Lucifer.
Yeah, and he actually starts showing
The main
care for a
character
woman in
is
there, and
Satan.
He gets
Yeah.
in trouble with
Yeah.
hell for it.
There was another movie, Hellboy, where it's following a demon who's like a good demon, because that's a thing, you know.
Didn't they make Superman kind of?
They did.
Some of the latest ones
Yep.
of those.
So-
Like, Superman was like good as gold
Yep,
when I was a kid.
that's right. Yeah. So Civil War, I think it was, where Superman and or not Civil. Well, that's Marvel. Yeah.
It was Batman versus
Yeah.
Superman.
Yeah, Batman versus Superman is where it kind of grays everything. Superman is kind of operating in a gray area. Marvel Avengers Civil War is another good example, right? Marvel started off very good guys and bad guys. I mean, you always had people like Tony Stark that were,
Right.
you know, and somewhat anti-hero types, right? But it definitely shifted more and more to where they even had, I might be mixing this up with DC, well, DC Comics has one too, where it's, DC Comics has the Suicide Squad, which is all the traditionally bad guys, but now they've been forced to work for good, right? So anyhow, you think of tons of examples of this, right?
There's a cartoon called Bad Guys.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Which in that case they actually turn good, which is a good example. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so in 2002, the Barna Group found that 83% of American teenagers said that moral truth depends on circumstances. Only 6% said objective moral values exist. 6%.
In 2002.
2002. That's right.
Worse than now.
And then for adults, 75% claimed to embrace moral relativism. Right? I mean, this is, and you don't have to be great at math to realize that there's a good number of Christians in those numbers, right? Professing, believing Christians who are embracing moral relativism. Kind of scary. All right.
That's a pretty small group.
It is 6%. That's right.
They're just on one campus. Something, yeah.
Well, and it could depend on like how you phrase the question, but anyhow. All right. So one of the related worldviews that's kind of leads to this is materialism. Materialism is the belief. I'm not talking about just money here. Materialism is the belief that reality only consists of matter, energy, and physical processes, right? And so materialism is, you think science, right? The scientific worldview is very materialistic, right? So it focuses on only what is observable and material, right? It will be very objectivistic in its truth claims about the material world, right? So scientists believe that 1 + 1 = 2, and that's a fact. They believe that water consists of 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. There's no debate there. They're objectivistic. There is such a thing as truth in the scientific world. But if you embrace materialism, this idea that reality only consists of what's material, then you dismiss anything that is immaterial, right? Which would be the entire spiritual realm, anything that exists in the material realm, right? So if you embrace pure materialism, a purely and exclusively scientific worldview, you will reject anything that falls outside of that, which means that you will tend towards relativism when it comes to matters of morality, right? So, because morality does not exist in the concrete, does not exist in the physical world. Morality belongs to the immaterial world. And so if there is no immaterial world, there's no basis for morality, right? And this is why you can have very, very intelligent scientists who are sharp as a tack and can tell you anything you never wanted to know about creation, right? But then when it comes to religion, they're like all loosey-goosey and they hold all these conflicting worldviews because to them, those aren't things that are actually true. They can't be assessed for truth claims, right? They just put them outside of that category. Does that make sense? So that's why these two things tend to go together. And in our society, you've got both materialism and relativism, moral relativism, existing side by side because they really feed off of one another. Okay? All right, so some examples in Scripture of moral relativism. One of the most famous, I think, is when Jesus is standing before Pilate. Jesus says to Pilate, "You say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Right? And so in this moment, like Pilate knows what's true, right? He knows that Jesus has not done anything. And he says in the next line, "I find no guilt in him." He knows what's true. But in that moment, he is tempted towards a sort of moral relativism to say, well, that's not the truth I need right now. I need a different truth. I need the truth that you're guilty because that's what's expedient. And so he is willing to compromise and embrace this sort of relativistic view to suit his needs at the time, right? It's kind of a pragmatic relativism. And then in the Old Testament and Judges, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So everybody's just, following their own version of the truth. There's no standards, no right and wrong. So these aren't pure relativism, but it's kind of leaning that direction. One of the best examples that I've encountered of relativism is in the Baha'i religion. So back in 2007, Jennifer and I went on a mission trip. We were dating, going to college at that time. Went on a mission trip to India. And I got to go to a Baha'i temple. They're all shaped like a lotus flower. There's like, I don't know, just a handful of them in the world. Giant lotus flower shaped temple. They're very pretty. They were handing out these little cards. And a line from this card just burned in my brain. And so I'll read part of it, this quote here. "The fundamental principle enunciated by Baha'u'llah, which is their religious founder, is that religious truth is not absolute but relative, that divine revelation is a continuous and progressive process, that all the great religions of the world are divine in origin, that their basic principles are in complete harmony, and that their aims and purposes are one and the same, that their teachings are but facets of one truth, that their functions are complementary, that they differ only in the non-essential aspects of their doctrines." That line was burned in my brain. "And that their missions represent successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society." So this is, we'll come back to this here shortly, right? And we'll pick apart this thing, and probably already you're coming up with 100 reasons why this does not make sense, right? And just as a side note, the most disturbing part of all this was that some of the people handing me these little tracts were Americans that had immigrated to India on spiritual pilgrimage to try to find the truth. I'm like, you left a land founded on Christian principles with churches everywhere to come here to the heart of darkness, right? Anyhow, that's so it was baffling. But just look at the truth, the claims in this, right? Religious truth is not absolute but relative. Divine revelation is continuous and progressive. All the great religions are divine in origin. Their basic principles are the same. They differ only in their non-essential aspects, right? And so this is Baha'i's version of moral relativism. We're going to come back to this, so I'm just going to keep going for now. All right, so what's the alternative? So relativism is one main approach to knowledge. The other approach is objectivism, and we're going to look at non-Christian objectivism first. So moral objectivism is the belief that there is a universal, unchanging, transcendent standard of right and wrong, truth and falsehood. Okay, so I'll break that down a little bit. Another term for moral objectivism is absolute truth. You'll hear those used interchangeably. So it's universal, right? It transcends culture and time and location, whereas moral relativists say, well, what's right for this culture may be wrong for this culture, and what's right for that culture may be wrong for this one, right? But they're all equal. Moral objectivism says, no, true morality, truth is universal, applies to all cultures everywhere, right? It has not changed over time. It's remained, moral truth has remained unchanging over time, and it transcends humanity. It's transcendent. It is not a product of human culture. It imposes itself upon human culture, right? That's the claim of moral of objectivism.
But set by what or who?
That's what. Well, we'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there. So that is the question, right? But you see some examples of this belief. So Jimmy Carter said, we must adjust to changing times and still hold to unchanging principles, right? These unchanging principles are the moral absolutes, the moral objectives, right? Abraham Lincoln says, I am not bound to win, but I am bound to be true. I am not bound to succeed, but I am bound to live up to what light I have. I must stand with anyone that stands right, stand with him while he is right, and part with him when he goes wrong. And so this is the idea that there is such a thing as right and wrong, good and evil, and that system of law, moral law, imposes itself upon us so that we are bound by it. Regardless of what culture we're in, we are bound by this system of right and wrong, right? So other religions believe objective moral truth, but they argue that it's found elsewhere, right? So this is where Christianity parts ways with all the other religions. So, for example, Islam, where is objective moral truth found for Islam? Say what? The Quran, that's right. And the life of Muhammad, there's some other works that they follow, right? But ultimate truth is found in the Quran and in their prophet Muhammad, right? Judaism, where is absolute truth found for a Jew? In the Torah, or the Tanakh, which is what they call the Old Testament, and the rabbinical writings. So this is important. Modern-day Jews, practically none of them that I'm aware of follow just the Old Testament. They also follow the rabbinical writings, like the Talmud and others, Mishnah and some others. All right, so Catholicism. This one may be a little tricky. Where's ultimate truth found for a Catholic?
The Pope.
So the Bible, right, and church tradition as espoused by official Catholic doctrine. In Catholic teaching, those are equal sources of authority, right? The Bible is on equal footing with whatever the Pope says, and whatever the Pope says is on equal footing with the Bible, right? There are two sources of divine authority. Right.
What happens when they conflict?
That was a good. You get a little thing called the Protestant Reformation. That's what. Anywho, Mormonism. Where's the objective truth for Mormons? The Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith and his drunken induced stupors. So I'm not tipping my cards at all, am I? So the Christian worldview is rooted strongly in objectivism. We are an objectivistic religion. Our religion, we believe that there is such a thing as right and wrong, good and evil, right? So how do we defend that? Our purpose here is apologetics, to make a defense. How can we defend objectivism to a world that does not believe this, or believes that truth is found in other objective truths, right? So going back to our little chart from last week, right? Depending on what our purpose is, whether we're arguing for tolerance or rationality, gospel or orthodoxy, is going to determine what source of knowledge we appeal to, right? So if we are arguing in the public sphere for tolerance for Christianity, saying, look, we believe that there's an objective right and wrong, and we have a certain standard for marriage and sexuality and ethics and all of this, we're probably going to not appeal to Scripture for that objective claim. We're going to appeal to general knowledge, right, for general revelation. But if we're promoting orthodoxy or trying to promote the gospel and saying, hey, there is a truth and it's Jesus, we're probably going to go to John 14:6, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? So think of those two categories there, general revelation and particular revelation. Let's look first at arguments from general revelation. All right, so how do we defend objectivism from general revelation? All right, I want you to think of the claims of moral relativism, that moral truth is relative depending on your perspective, your culture, your time. There's no such thing as absolute truth. Can you think of just a general logical argument that might defeat that?
Give me an example.
Creation.
Okay, how so?
You had to start somewhere outside of what's there.
Okay.
That's what we said last week.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. Okay, Brianna?
No, I said I need an example.
Oh, okay. So someone says to you, you're talking to someone at work or school or whatever, and someone says, you're trying to share the gospel with them, for example, and someone says, well, that's your truth, but I just think that God is the universe, an impersonal force, and I pray to my crystals, and that works for me. That's my truth.
Sounds like my sister.
I don't know your sister, so I promise I'm not picking on her. So how would you respond?
Me?
Sure. Go for it.
Pass the hell, sounds like me.
All right. Well, let's.
What's always stuck with me is, where does love come from?
That's a good one. What purpose is there for me to sacrifice myself for someone else if there is no objective right and wrong, right? I would only ever be motivated by what's good for me in the moment, right? So one of the things that we need to understand about moral relativism, if I can get it to pull up there. Where is it? What happened? Okay, I think it dropped. Yeah, got gremlins on the TV here. Let's try this again here. Okay, well, I was pulling up. Moral relativism is self-defeating. So let's walk through the logic here and see if you can follow how this is true. The claim of moral relativism is that there's no such thing as absolute truth. That claim is a truth claim. It's a claim about what's true. But you just said that there's no such thing as truth, right? So you can't assert that that claim is true when you have, by that claim, denied that truth exists. It's illogical. It doesn't actually make any sense. It's self-defeating. And so we go back to another good way of thinking about this is if someone says, there's no such thing as absolute truth, the simple reply is, are you absolutely sure? How can you know that's true, right? You just said there's no such thing as truth. And so it's completely self-refuting. So when we look at this Baha'i statement of faith, look at what it says here. The foundation of all the divine religions is one. So this is a separate passage from the one I read you earlier. Listen to this one. The foundation of all the divine religions is one. All are based upon reality. Okay, now, think about this. It just earlier said that there is no such thing as objective truth, right? That religious truth is relative. Now it's claiming that there's such a thing as reality. Which is it? Is there no such thing as moral truth, or is there such a thing as reality, right? Reality does not admit plurality. So they acknowledge here that pluralism, the existence of multiple religions, is incompatible with the idea of there being such a thing as reality. Because if there is such a thing as reality, then only one of these religions can be true, right? You can't have all of them be true if there's such a thing as reality, right? So they're contradicting themselves. Reality does not admit plurality, yet amongst mankind there have arisen differences concerning the manifestations of God. In other words, there's a lot of religions. How do we reconcile this? Some have been Zoroastrians, some are Buddhists, some are Jews, Christians, Mohammedans, and so on. This has become a source of divergence, whereas the teachings of the holy souls who founded the divine religions are one in essence and reality. So they're saying we can't get along because there's all these religions. What's the solution? All of these have served the world of humanity. All have guided souls to the attainment of perfections. But among the nations, certain imitations of ancestral forms of worship have arisen. These imitations are not the foundation and the essence of the divine religions, inasmuch as they differ from the reality and the essential teachings of the manifestations of God. Dissensions have arisen and prejudice have developed. So there's an acknowledgement, don't miss this, that the major religions of the world differ from the reality, right? That kind of sounds like moral objectivism, doesn't it? That there's such a thing as truth, and that therefore some of the religions don't match that truth. They differ from reality. So earlier, they said that moral religious truth is relative, and now they're saying, no, there is such a thing as reality, and all the other religions are differing from it. Guess which religion they think matches reality? Theirs. Right? Let's keep going. If we abandon these time-worn imitations, what time-worn imitations? What's it talking about? All the other religions. So what's the solution to all this disagreement? Abandon your religion and join ours. At the end of the day, this claim that Baha'is make that religious truth is relative, the quote-unquote fundamental principle enunciated by the Baha'u'llah is that religious truth is relative, right? That was their words. That's the fundamental principle. And yet they have now contradicted that and said you need to actually abandon all of your poor imitations and follow the one true way, which is Baha'i. All right, so here's the point I'm trying to make. They even realize that moral relativism doesn't work. They want you to think that it does so that you will abandon your religion and follow theirs, or at least give them space to do their religion, right? But they themselves do not actually believe in moral relativism. When they follow it out to its logical conclusion, it's untenable. It's self-contradictory, right? So Paul Copan says, moral relativism cannot be lived out consistently. Relativists are typically selective, and they don't remain relativist when their rights are violated. Think back to what happened in 2001, right? Before 2001. 2002, we got, 80-something% of the population being moral relativists, so apparently it didn't last. But in 2001, when the towers fell, all of a sudden there was such a thing as good and evil, right? Everyone was outraged. There was no talk about, well, that's just their religion and they're, we're on equal footing with them and we should just let them practice their religion the way they see fit. No, it was an outrage, call to war, call to arms. There was evil in the world that needed to be stamped out. Apparently a year later, when they did the Barna research, all that had faded, and now there's no such thing as right and wrong. But anytime you see a moral relativist saying, well, to each their own, all you got to do is violate their rights, what they think they deserve, and all of a sudden, now there's a right and a wrong, and you've violated it, right? No one actually is a pure moral relativist. It's impossible. People try it. They will say things that are consistent with moral relativism, but they can't hold it forever because sooner or later their toes get stepped on. C.S. Lewis wrote about this in his book called The Abolition of Man, and this is a really difficult quote. I'm just going to summarize it because it's kind of hard to, without the context. What he's basically saying, if I'll put it in my own words, is that everywhere we look in modern society, we see people saying, railing about fake news, right? But if there's no such thing as objective truth, then there's no such thing as fake news. There might be my news and your news, but there's no such thing as fake news, right? It's just my truth and your truth. Society demands compassion and empathy, but if there and love, right? Like Russell said, but if there's no such thing as moral absolutes, then why should I care about you at all? What's in it for me, right? Society clamors for justice, but if you destroy right and wrong through moral relativism, there is no standard by which to judge and execute justice. If you hold moral relativism, the end result is a society that implodes upon itself, which is exactly what we see happening, by the way. And you see this happening especially in European countries and in Canada. I just saw a video. I almost showed it to you, but it's from a political commentator, and I thought better not. But honestly, it was spot on. He was talking about the collapse of society in Canada as they have abandoned this idea of any kind of moral absolutes and how their society is collapsing. And so this is the natural result of what you get when you embrace that. Materialism is incapable of offering a source for truth outside of the material realm, right? So materialism is not the same thing as moral relativism, but they are related, like we talked about earlier. And since materialism only believes that only what's made of matter is objectively verifiable, moral and religious truth, well, they go beyond that. Science has no means to assess truth claims when it comes to morality. So what I mean by that, let's think about death, right? Science can tell you how, when, and maybe by whose hand a person died. Science can tell you that a person's dead, how they died, when they died, where they died, and who killed them. It cannot tell you whether that death was justifiable or morally right? For that, you have to leave the science lab and you have to go to a court of law, right? Because what's being assessed is a moral claim of right and wrong, and science can't help you there. Science can tell you, perhaps, whether a vaccine is effective. It cannot tell you whether or not you should take it or force other people to take it, right? Yeah. I know, I want to poke the bear on that one. Science can tell you whether or not a baby is, an embryo is living. It cannot make any assessment whether or not it's okay to kill that thing, right? For that, we have to go outside the realm of science. Now, we can inform our decisions with science. We can talk about heartbeat and all of that, right? But ultimately, whether that's right or wrong goes to an objective moral standard that transcends and is outside the realm of science, right? And so if you adopt an exclusively materialistic worldview, what you end up with is complete amorality, a complete rejection of any kind of moral system, which is why you will find some critical thinking atheist even saying, mourning the loss of Christianity in our culture, because they're starting to realize that with Christianity, with the decline of Christianity, comes the decline of civilization itself. Because as Christianity goes, the morals go, and society goes. A purely materialistic society cannot survive. Right? So that is kind of my argument from general revelation. There's one more component of that, which I would argue is that moral objectivism is self-evident. If moral relativism is self-defeating, moral objectivism is self-evident. Basically, in other words, it's kind of obvious. Everyone has an internal moral compass that convicts them or justifies them based upon their actions. Paul talks about this in Romans 2. He says, when the Gentiles who do not have the law, by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. Right? So Paul is talking about even Gentiles who have never even heard of God's law have an internal moral compass, and they by nature do the things that the law requires, and therefore reveal that they have such a moral compass, right? And yeah, there's a lot of divergence between cultures on what's considered right and what's considered wrong, but there's also a ton of similarity. Aristotle even argued about that there was a general law based on nature, that even when the written law varied, there was this general law, this natural law that existed that you could appeal to for justice. And he says that justice is real and expedient. It's not a fiction. It's not made up. It's real. And this is an unwritten law he talks about. So this is all the way back with Aristotle. That's not even a Christian writing that, right? So every culture has a moral code about things like murder and theft and adultery and lying and caring for the elderly and children. These things are so self-evident, they don't even need a justification, right? I forgot to play the video earlier. I'll just post it on our Facebook page or something. But in the video, there's a 3-minute video that I meant to show you at the very beginning, where Sean McDowell talks about moral truth and all of this, and he says, you don't need someone to tell you that torturing an innocent baby, is wrong. People that can't figure that out for themselves need to be medicated, basically, and see a psychiatrist, right? And everybody knows that worldwide. Like, this is a moral truth that transcends every culture. You think about the writers of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inherent and inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It says these things are self-evident. You don't even have to explain why we know these are true, because it's just obvious. And then in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, which, by the way, if you get a chance, read this book. It's a fantastic apologetic work. He says human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. There's this unshakable feeling that we ought to do certain things and ought not do certain things, and we can't get rid of it no matter what we do. It's always there, right? Now, there's a lot of arguments we can make from Scripture, from particular revelation. I've listed a bunch of verses there on your page. I'll let you look those up on your own. I'll give you the fill in the blanks here. Scripture assumes the existence of truth and falsehood, right? The truth and falsehood. And so Ephesians 4:25 talks about putting away falsehood and speaking the truth with your neighbor. 1 John 1:6 talks about walking in darkness and lying, not practicing the truth. Secondly, Jesus claimed to be the source of all truth. John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. A bunch of other verses that we could talk about there. Scripture claims to be the standard of all truth, right? 2 Timothy 4 talks about people accumulating teachers to themselves that will tell them what they want to hear. I mean, if that's not moral relativism, I don't know what is. John 17:17, Jesus says, your word is truth. Psalm 119, your word is truth. And 2 Peter 1:20, he talks about how Scripture is not a matter of your own interpretation. It's from God. It comes from the will of God, not from the will of man. And then thirdly, Scripture declares eternal consequences for believing and promoting falsehood. So there are consequences for getting it wrong. Isaiah 5:20 says, woe to those who call good evil, or evil good and good evil. Well, that's a word for our day, isn't it? Proverbs 16, there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Romans 1, you're going to get tired of me referencing it, but it's so relevant for apologetics. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against ungodliness. Why? Because they're suppressing the truth, right? So Scripture makes it very clear, and then in the end it talks about how, though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, there's a penalty for falsehood.